One time when I was driving through the countryside here in northeastern Wisconsin between my parishes, I couldn't help but notice that several of the houses that I drove by had statues of Mary or statues of Joseph or the Sacred Heart out in front of the yard. And I realized that a Roman Catholic lived in that house, and they were proudly displaying to any person that came in their driveway, that came to their home, that they were telling them, "I'm a believer. I believe in the Lord. I believe in Mary's intercession." These examples of faith that people have are just one way that people in northeastern Wisconsin have showed and demonstrated their faith over the years. It's probably the most common way today. But what if I told you there was another common expression, especially among the Belgian people? And it's not just a statue, but it's a chapel. I'm Father Edward Looney, and today I'm happy to share with you the stories of the roadside chapels of northeastern Wisconsin. Here in northeastern Wisconsin, we have these roadside chapels, built commonly by the Belgian immigrants. These aren't new expressions of faith for the Belgians though, because as they lived in the motherland, they had roadside chapels there. In fact, on a trip that I made to Belgium in 2015, I visited one of those roadside chapels, and it was built in the middle of the road. They had built the road around this chapel because that's how important this chapel of faith was to them. In fact, on Instagram, there's a hashtag, roadside chapels in Belgium, that one individual has shown some of these roadside chapels and wanted to share them with others, and now you can go and discover these chapels from the motherland. But the Belgians immigrated here to Wisconsin in 1850. And as they did so, they began to settle here in northeastern Wisconsin, and perhaps you might know one of the most famous Belgians that immigrated here. Her name was Adele Brise, later became Sister Adele Brise, and in 1859, at the age of 28, she saw the Blessed Virgin Mary. And in fact, maybe we could say that that was one of the very first chapels that the Belgians built here in the area to commemorate that Marian apparition. Other chapels have been built since, dating even back to 1870, and some are still being built today.
The roadside chapels is a tradition that came over from Belgium. Belgium did have chapels, only theirs were made of brick, stone. The ones around here, the real old ones, majority of them were built of wood. And they built them on their property, close to a road, in case an itinerant traveler would happen to be going down the road. They could come and say a prayer at the chapel without disturbing the homestead. It also was a way for the people that owned that particular land to be able to go and say a rosary, say a novena, say a prayer without having to make the trip to the nearest church, which was sometimes a hardship. The group that really settled in around here came over in 1856. And that was the largest influx of Belgians. They just found out that land was cheap, and they came over with the false feeling that the winters were mild and that the land was good for harvesting the same crops that they grew in Belgium. Okay, in 1853 was the first group that came over, and they came over largely because of a land shortage in Belgium. It was not unusual for only one son to inherit land. And so if the others happened to be, if there had been more than one son, the others didn't have any inheritance of any sort. So they wanted to come for land. And there also was a famine going on in Europe. And so they came over for that. A little bit of religious persecution. And they just wanted freedom to be able to expand their knowledge, have a better life for their children.
The spirit of that Belgian heritage of these roadside chapels is still alive today. Lots of people, hundreds, maybe thousands, who knows the exact number, visit these chapels every summer. People hear about them. They want to stop. They want to see what this is all about. And there are so many different chapels to see, so much history to be shared, so many prayers to be said. Some of these chapels are simple. Some of them are ornate. Some of them are easy to find and you can spot them right alongside the road, and others are a bit more difficult or maybe even hidden on the property. Some of them are open to the public, and others are closed, and maybe you need special permission from the homeowner to enter them. But all of these roadside chapels express the faith and devotion of the people. What can you expect when you find a roadside chapel, when you have that address and you stop at your first roadside chapel? Of course, you walk up, and as you walk into the chapel, there you'll see the chapel and everything there. Whatever the chapel's name is, probably you're going to see the principal patron of that chapel. If it's the Chapel of the Sacred Heart, you're going to see an image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus there. If it's St. Odile, you'll see an image of St. Odile, because the people are coming there for that particular reason. If you have an eye disorder, you're going to go to St. Odile Chapel. If you're praying in the middle of a health pandemic, you're going to visit St. Roch Chapel. The chapels are smaller in size typically. There's usually a raised platform and an altar there that all of these holy images are displayed upon. We might find other little objects in there as well. We might find family records and many other things. This is what you can expect to find in one of these roadside chapels when you make your visit.
Also, as part of the family history of whichever chapel it happens to be, there might be baptismal records, confirmation, wedding registers. It's sort of like the simile of opening up a Bible and finding all the religion of that particular family. It's put inside the chapel.
Everything in here has pretty much been donated. The cross above Mary is a gift that my son got as a wedding present, and he offered to donate it here. The holy water font was a gift from Rick's sister.
The two pictures on the wall are paintings that my father brought back from Korea. He served in the Korean War, and he had these paintings made for my grandmother and my mother. They're painted on silk, and it's Agony in the Garden and the Sacred Heart. I inherited them from my mother and my grandmother, and now they're here in our chapel.
Not only are there chapels dedicated to some of the most popular saints in Catholicism, but some of the chapels are dedicated to obscure saints. You might read their names in some literature, and you might say, who is that saint? Up until 2020, I promise you, I never heard of St. Roch before. But there was a chapel to St. Roch, and it became a center of prayer and a place that I, as a priest, went to pray for my people during the COVID-19 pandemic, leading a virtual novena, praying at this chapel to St. Roch, asking him to pray for the sick in my community, praying that we might be spared deaths from the COVID-19 virus. St. Roch was unknown, but that chapel became so popular during COVID-19. There are other chapels dedicated to, for example, St. Ghislaine, an obscure saint that probably you've never heard of. In fact, I'm not even sure if I'm saying his name right. But yet someone a long time ago built this chapel, put an image of St. Ghislaine there, and people have prayed at this chapel now for many decades.
St. Ghislaine, actually Ghislaine is a name that is used a lot in Belgians. My middle name is Jolaine, which is English equivalent, I believe, of Ghislaine. Alex Flemmel was a homesteader in Mézières. Unfortunately, his family had, I believe, 2 children die at a young age of seizures. And his wife was pregnant again. And so he said a prayer to St. Ghislaine and said, if our family has children lie, and they live, I will build you a small chapel in your honor. And it is a well-known fact that he had, I believe, 2 other children that were born and lived to be a ripe old age. In fact, his tombstone is in St. Michael's Cemetery, Alex's. It's an interesting tidbit. Each one, like I said, each one of these roadside chapels have a story behind them.
There's another chapel, which is one of the older chapels, called the St. Donat Chapel. St. Donat, again, not sure who he is, but I can tell you that people invoke him, especially during storms. They ask his prayers and his intercession for safety during any inclement weather.
For the longest time when I was growing up, I could not see that chapel. It was covered by lilac bushes. It was completely obliterated. And a group came along and cut the lilac bushes, and it brought forth this neat stone chapel. And it is the patron saint of safety from storms. And if you went in there, you would feel very safe from a storm because the window ledges are at least this thick. It's also, as the story behind it goes, was a chapel that Father Dames would say Mass in while the church in Rosaire was being built.
In addition to some of the more obscure saints, of course, as you visit these chapels, you're going to encounter some of the more common saints of Catholicism that people will invoke their intercession. One of the most popular saints in Catholicism, St. Anthony of Padua. St. Anthony of Padua is the saint often invoked when you lose your car keys or lose some personal effect. You ask St. Anthony to help you find it. Another common saint that people invoke, known as the patron saint of hopeless causes, St. Jude. You'll find many St. Jude statues in these chapels, but there's one chapel that's dedicated to St. Jude. One of the more difficult and hard to find roadside chapels is actually one chapel that most people want to find because it's one of those chapels that there's such a pressing need to ask his prayers. And that's St. Peregrine. We know him as the cancer saint. St. Peregrine's roadside chapel is located in Rosaire at St. Hubert Catholic Church on County Road X. It's kind of hidden on the property. It's at the back end of the parking lot. Today, there's a footpath that leads you back to this beautiful roadside chapel in which you can spend some quiet. There's some benches along the way that you can sit, take a rest, take a moment to reflect, and then to arrive at that chapel of St. Peregrine and to ask his prayers for your loved one or maybe for yourself who's struggling, who's fighting that fight of cancer. When the stained glass windows at the church in Rosaire were being re-leaded, the company that was doing it went back and looked at the St. Peregrine Chapel, noticed some broken windows, and they said, we want to make some stained glass windows for this chapel. And so they made the 2 custom stained glass windows that are there today, all because they stopped and said a prayer for someone they knew who is battling and fighting cancer. St. Peregrine is a powerful saint, a powerful intercessor. If you know someone, perhaps a visit to that roadside chapel is in store for you so that you can offer a prayer to God for them. As you travel and you discover the roadside chapels, you'll also find that some of them commemorate a closed church. This is the case in Three Dames, located at St. Odile's Cemetery. It's also the case on County Road K at St. Martin of Tours Cemetery, that the chapel there is a remembrance of the church that no longer is there. It helps people to remember that people gathered and worshiped Sunday after Sunday, and some of the statues or stained glass windows are found there. In a sense, these chapels are places that individuals are able to remember their past history of where they once went to Mass, so that the living history of their ancestors will never be forgotten. This is also the case in Namur, Our Lady of the Snows Chapel, located about a mile or 2 from the closed church of St. Mary of the Snows, recalls and houses many of the things that were found within the Church of Our Lady of the Snows. Finding these chapels at people's homes and alongside the road, it's kind of an obscure thing. You wouldn't expect to find them. So why exactly would a person want to build a chapel? There are some stories of why these chapels were built. For example, one of them was built because an individual was on the ice and they fell through the ice and they cried out to God and they said, "God, if you save me, I promise I will build a chapel to the Blessed Virgin Mary." As you can imagine, there's a roadside chapel to the Blessed Mother because that person was spared. So they built it out of gratitude to God for the preservation of their life, for the grace of an answered prayer.
The story goes as Joseph built it because he was a stonemason and he was making lime and cement, and he got his eyes burnt from the lime, and he asked Saint Odile, who was a patron saint of eyesight, that if she would help him keep his eyesight, that he would build a chapel for her in her name. And obviously it's lasted this long because it's a stone chapel with very thick stone walls.
The chapel was built in the 1800s by a gentleman by the name of Ernest Baudouin, and he built it for the reasons of health. Apparently, as we understand, he was either in an accident or some sort of a health issue, and it was built in thanksgiving and in prayer for his recovery, is what we understand. And it was rebuilt in 1930s, 1940s sometime by the Jaden family. Mark Jaden, who was the caretaker prior to us, it was his grandfather who rebuilt it in the 1930s, 1940s, somewhere in that time frame. And that's what we know of the origins of this Chapel of Perpetual Help.
Of course, another reason why some of these chapels were built were simply to be a place that family or individuals could gather in prayer. That's the case at the St. Anthony of Padua Chapel, located along the nature trail at the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. That a priest there, Father Edward Lemieux, while he was still a seminarian and not yet a priest, his family built this chapel so that when he would come home on breaks, he would have a place where he could pray his breviary, his divine office, his morning and evening prayer. Another gentleman that I know had a roadside chapel at his house, and in that chapel he prayed daily the prayers of St. Bridget. He prayed his rosary. It became a little place for him to spend his time in quiet prayer with his God. The same can be said for many of the people who are blessed to have these roadside chapels on their property today. They make a point to stop there and to pray, maybe not every day, but to bring their grandkids and their family to spend some time in prayer, to teach them about the saints, to share with them the stories about the Catholic faith.
I know my wife and I go there often to do some of our prayers, and I know my children go there also, and now I've got cousins and other siblings that are going there to pray, and it's just part of our spot that we can go to pray for whatever our needs are and share our faith with other people and to pray.
The grandkids love to go and visit and pray in there. It's so cute to see them kneel down in the little kneeler and talk to God and stuff, so that's pretty special too.
When my grandchildren come over, I bring them down here and we all say a prayer. I have books here that they can look at and read through, look at the pictures. But when my 5-year-old granddaughter went to Lincoln with her family, they were selling the olive wood carvings. And when she saw it, she wanted to buy one and bring it to Grandma's chapel. And it's the praying hands with the rosary around it. So already at 5 years old, I'm starting to get it into them that Jesus is with us and Mary is with us all the time.
Many of these chapels were built many decades ago. And as you can imagine, some of the individuals who first built them or who cared for them have since gone to their rest in the Lord. They've gone to their eternal reward. What happens next to those roadside chapels? It is now the next generation that is taking ownership of these chapels, refurbishing, renovating the chapels. They are restoring them so that they can continue to remain here as a sign and witness to the testament of faith and their Belgian heritage. Some of these chapels have been moved from one location to another and now are entrusted to new caretakers and new owners.
Well, yeah, I always knew there was a Destry chapel, but there's a lot of Destries, and I always understood that we came from the Kewanee area. And I had a person call me up to help fix the outside. The outside was deteriorating again. The mortar joints and the paint were in dire need of some more work. So I went there to look at it, and when I stepped inside, I saw a picture of my great-grandpa's family. I didn't know it was my great-grandpa at the time, but I saw my grandpa in the picture. And that's when I finally realized that this person that built this chapel was on my side of the family. And I got very interested, obviously, because it's part of our family. And it's also historically important to the Belgian area, the whole Brussels area, to keep it going.
When we did move it in 2008, that's the time that we moved it from Ledge Road. The Jaden family and the Bodwin family had it on Ledge Road, which is a road that is just a tad bit north of Namur. And we moved it in 2008 after the estate was settled, and we wanted to get it closer to our property so we could watch it more closely. And what does that mean by watching it? That means that when it arrived, we moved it with a couple of skidsters and a flat rack, and it went down the road. My dad and my father-in-law, Gary Thace and Gary Gillett, helped me and Deb move it. Then we refurbished it. We put some new siding on it. It was in need of a new roof. The door was in disrepair. Deb and her mom, Karen, redid the inside, all in its original, sanded it down and stained it and all that type of stuff. So yeah, it's special to be a caretaker. We know that it is not ours. It is only ours to watch over. It's the people that came before us that built it and visited. It's their chapel, and we want to know that when they come to visit it, it's in a nice setting that is peaceful for them.
We might think that these roadside chapels are something people built decades ago, 50, 60, even more than 100 years ago. To the present day, individuals still want to build these roadside chapels. And they're still building them for the very same reasons that their ancestors built chapels. For one person, she grew up visiting those chapels and always wanted one. And when diagnosed with cancer, she knew it was time to build her chapel.
I was diagnosed in February of 2020 with liver cancer. I needed a liver transplant. And on Holy Saturday, my husband and my children, in-laws, all got together and built the chapel for me. Growing up, my parents took me to roadside chapels, and I liked a lot of different things from different chapels, so we just kind of put all those little pieces together to come up with our own chapel. And my husband was in charge of everything. He got everybody together, our family. My youngest son poured the concrete, got all the handprints of the grandchildren in there. My oldest son and my nephew were framers for a company, so they framed everything up and got the pattern and put everything together. My daughter and her husband did a lot of the inside work with the knotty pine. My husband did it all. He just helped everywhere and did the whole thing, planned the whole thing. Everything was done with love. Nobody was paid anything to do or donate anything. It was all done with love. From family, friends, my nephew, everybody just donated the decorations, the supplies. It was just all in love.
I know of another individual who is grateful for the healthy delivery of many of her grandchildren and wishes today to build a chapel soon in order to honor their Belgian heritage and to be able to have a place to pray with her grandchildren to give thanks to God and Mary's intercession for them.
Mary came and talked to Adele Brise at the main shrine, asked her to teach the children. So I'm hoping that anybody and everybody that drives by, walks by, will stop and spread the word and teach their children and grandchildren, and everybody can take part in teaching the children in the future.
These roadside chapels were a part of our faith as growing up. We visited these roadside chapels, and hopefully this can continue on, and the young people can visit these chapels and grow in their faith like we did.
It's part of our culture. It's part of our Belgian heritage, the roadside chapel. So it always was special to us. It was always something that I've always wanted, and it meant a lot to me. The name came from my inner peace. Whenever I am thinking about Mary, praying with Mary, I'm just so at peace, and she just makes me feel good.
When the Belgians left their homeland in the 1850s and settled here in northeastern Wisconsin, they brought with them their deep faith and devotion and their customs. They built these roadside chapels over the subsequent years, and today, many years later, here we are telling their story, sharing these roadside chapels. Never would they have imagined that these roadside chapels would have stood the test of time. But yet, any casual visitor to Door County, any person visiting the National Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help in Champion, Wisconsin, they will find themselves at these roadside chapels. And there they will encounter the rich Belgian heritage and history. They'll encounter tradition. They will offer prayer and encounter the presence and peace of God in these little chapels. They might be small chapels, but people visit them with a big faith and trust in God. Little roadside chapels in northeastern Wisconsin stand as a testament to the faith of the Belgian people, the power of prayer and trust and saintly intercession. Other immigrant communities have similar customs. The Polish have little shrines alongside the road. In the greater Madison area, other chapels were built for similar reasons after a tornado or a diphtheria epidemic. I'm willing to bet that such saintly devotion isn't confined to Wisconsin. You might find similar expressions where you live. The Belgian chapels teach us to make time for God, find a saintly intercessor, and be sure to give thanks to God for the many blessings of your life. That's a message for you no matter what your nationality or where you live.